Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another live event. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how to plan a backpacking trip in the High Sierra, which I can't speak for Katie, but at least for me, this is one of my most favorite places to backpack. I end up spending about a month per year there and have for going on like 15 years now. We're excited to bring this content to you. If you like this event, we actually did a similar one about a month ago for the Brooks Range of Alaska. And we've been doing quite a few of these live events throughout the year. Katie and I did one on, Katie, let's rattle them off. We did one on women's backpacking. We did one on
desert travel.
Mm-hmm.
We did winter backpacking. And then we had some special guests.
It's a good thing you remember.
I remember a few of them. I feel like I'm forgetting a lot. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been almost close to a month since we did one. So
yeah,
it's exciting.
Because we were in southern Utah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice that we enjoy doing these events. It's a good way for us to share some of the things that we know, and it seems like the reactions have been pretty good. So if you'd like to ask questions tonight, and by the way, I'm already seeing like a bunch of people are, if you would like to ask questions, you can use the chat. And then Katie also grabbed a couple questions from the Google form that we put up. And we kind of have a narrative arc for tonight. We have a bunch of topics we'd like to discuss, but we also want to answer your questions. So please go ahead and use that chat. And Katie and I will kind of volley back and forth on the topics. And then whoever's not talking usually will be looking at the questions that come through. Before we get going, I just want to offer that if you enjoyed tonight's presentation and you like Katie and me, then you might consider joining us on one of our guided trips. Our guided trips in California they start on the 18th of July, they finish in the beginning of August. And right now we have exactly 4 openings out of 147 spots. So I don't think that they're going to last. So go ahead and sign up if you're interested. Our next location is Alaska, but those trips are totally full. And then we finished the year in Yellowstone and West Virginia. Katie, offhand, do you remember how those are doing?
Yellowstone is totally full, and almost all of them are on wait list. But West Virginia, we still have some room right now.
Yeah. West Virginia, we have openings.
Yes. Should we dive in?
I think we should dive in.
Okay.
But first, one last thing. So tonight's presentation is going to go for 45 minutes. And Katie, we have a really hard stop at 45 minutes because dinner is going to be waiting for me. Amanda is cooking tonight.
Ooh. So, you've got your shirt on. So, why didn't you tell me? I would have worn mine. That's amazing. Are you going to give the backstory at all?
You can give the backstory.
I mean, it was a surprise from one of our Utah clients. We had an 11-day trip, and they all showed up with these shirts on, and one for Andrew and Amanda and myself.
Amanda's my wife. She wore it to bed the other night.
Did she?
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Very sexy bedtime night attire.
Yes. All right. Why do we love the High Sierra? Let's start there. What the appeal is, and then maybe some of the challenges, and we'll do kind of an overview and orientation before we dive into some more of the nuts and bolts.
Okay. Yeah. So the big appeal, if you haven't been to the High Sierra before, the big appeal is one is the aesthetics. It's just this. It's a majestic place. It's beautiful. It has these towering granite mountains, heavily glacier carved valleys, these like bright alpine blue lakes. There are a lot of really unique granite domes and slab features. If it's telling about the topography there, it has the highest point in the lower 48 and also the deepest canyon, which is not the Grand Canyon. So just a really dramatic place. Katie, what else do you love about the High Sierra?
I mean, the weather is pretty dreamy, almost like most of the time. So we'll get into the specifics of the backpacking season. But when I think of the Sierra, I think of cowboy camping, as long as it's not mosquito season, and just really pleasant walking temperatures during the day, and then nice cool nights. And you may get some more monsoonal patterns in like July and August, but otherwise it's really lovely. Like you don't have to worry about constant rain like you do in other locations. So it's pretty nice.
And then the last thing we love about the Sierra is just how big it is. This is a range that is, it depends on exactly how you measure it, but it's something on the order of like 170 miles by the way the crow flies. And then it's also really girthy. Like as an example, and I can show you a map later, the distance from east to west, from Mount Silliman, which is over 10,000 feet, to Mount Williamson, which is 14,000 feet, it's 21 miles, and in that 21-mile stretch, there's nothing. It's a pure wilderness area. So there really isn't another area that I can think of that has that length of wilderness and also that width. It might be worth pointing out that it's the longest continuous roadless stretch on the Pacific Crest Trail, or for that matter, probably any of the national scenic trails.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of something that would be longer on the CDT.
Mm-mm. I can't either.
And certainly not on the Appalachian Trail.
No. Okay, so those are some of the reasons, the appeal, and what are some of the challenges that came up when we were talking about this?
One is going to just be it's a limited season. So I always sometimes wonder, like, I strongly identify as a backpacker, but then when I think about the backpacking season, at least in like the mountain areas, it's basically June through September. Those are your months. And June can be iffy, and by the time you get in the second half of September, that can also be iffy. So it's just a limited season. It's like 4 months at the most.
Yeah, and I think this next item, partially, another challenge is the crowding, and I think partially that is because it's a limited season there, and because it's such a spectacular location. But just being a very popular place can lead to issues with getting permits, as well as just general busyness along like the main corridors, whether that be the main road that goes through, or trails like the JMT or PCT or high use camps. You're probably going to see a lot of people out there. So that's the other kind of challenge of this location. But if you know the right places to go, it's less of a challenge. And we'll talk about permitting specifically later in the discussion tonight. So,
Katie, before we go, we actually have a couple of comments, questions that I think I just will reiterate. So one is Professor HC says a really great book I had read recently is called High Sierra: A Love Story. It was a really great, highly recommended read. And I've heard that about the same. My wife actually grabbed it for me at the library, and I started reading it, and I thought it was really good too. And then I probably got sucked into YouTube or something. But
actually, I have it on hold right now at the library too, because so many people have mentioned it to me. So yes, highly recommended.
And then some of the other questions, there are a lot of questions about like, hey, I'm going to be hiking on the JMT starting June 19th. What should I expect of the conditions? So we'll go ahead and get to some of that and, a little bit later on in the presentation. Same thing about the suspension bridge over the South Fork of the San Joaquin.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Do you want to do like an orientation to the range in case anyone's unfamiliar with like where in the state it is, the primary places that one might go backpacking?
Well, I came up with an entire like CalTopo map, and
we've got CalTopo. It wouldn't be a presentation without CalTopo.
It's like hearsay. All right, so let me give you the quick High Sierra tour. And again, it depends a little bit on how you define it, but I think for me the High Sierra kind of extends all the way to Highway 108, which runs between Sonora and the Bridgeport area, and then it stops somewhere in like the lower elevations of the Kern River. So the Kern River, the headwaters are here, and the Kern River flows south. So like somewhere in here, maybe say like the boundary of the park. That's kind of the end of the High Sierra. So that distance is 170 miles. And then the width, this is what I was saying earlier about the width, like it's just this really girthy place. So this is Mount Silliman at over 10,000 feet. Here's Mount Williamson at 14,000 feet. And this is 21 miles. And there are other places in the range that are equally large or equally wide. So you can see like this brown color, it's going to represent alpine terrain. So just to give you some imagination for how wide this range gets in places. And like Katie and I both live in Colorado, and Katie, if there was a 10,000 footer and a 14,000 footer and they were separated by 21 miles, what would be between them? A ski resort?
Yeah.
A highway?
That's what I was thinking about.
An old mining town? Yeah. If you were in Wyoming, there'd be probably some ranches. Right. It's just rare to find like an area that's this big. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is where it is, and then just to give you like just some big points. So here's Reno. This would be, I might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So this is Reno. This is the Central Valley. So like your big town down here is Fresno. And one of the big things about planning a trip in the High Sierra is that you need to know whether you're going in on the east or the west sides, because there's only one road that crosses the range, and that's Tioga Road between like the Central Valley and Lee Vining, or the like 395 corridor. So when you're planning a trip, you need to know if you're going on the east side or west side. Because if you're going on the east side, that your best access is going to actually be like Southern California, because you can zoom up 395, or you can fly into Reno and then drive south. If you're going in on the west side, you're going to want to fly into ideally Fresno. That's going to be the easiest thing. You could also do the Bay Area or Sacramento. It's just a little bit further, but you'll have more flight options from there. We ready to move on to the next topic? Let's do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Or do you want me to keep talking about things?
You can keep talking about it. Someone was asking you what layer in Caltopo that is, so I was actually looking at Caltopo a minute ago.
Yeah, so this is actually just the Google map.
Okay.
And I find for just like Google, actually, like some of their base maps are really good just for kind of like understanding larger things. This is not a map that I would use to go backpacking, but for kind of just understanding the layout of things, this works really well.
Yep. Okay, let's talk about seasonality. So we already mentioned that the season for backpacking is really like June through September is when you're going to find, I was going to say prime backpacking, but really only backpacking, because otherwise it's like skiing and mountaineering. So let's talk about, when we were talking about this earlier this afternoon, we sort of broke it down by month, which I thought was really great. And we did this for the Brooks Range as well. So let's go through and talk about like what to expect essentially in each month. I think that's a good way to talk about it. So winter is essentially November through April. Everything is snowbound. And then when you're getting into April through May, what kind of conditions would you be expecting at that point?
So in April, the snowpack historically peaks around April 1st. So like that's going to be, when I talk about peaks, like the most amount of snow on the ground is April 1st. And then after April 1st, it still will snow, but there will be more melt on average each day than there is snow falling out of the sky. So April is generally considered like the best month for long ski traverses, because you have all the snow on the ground, but it hasn't started to melt really rapidly yet, which then gets us into May. So Katie, you want to take on May?
Yeah, so May is when like the snowpack is really starting to rapidly melt. You're often like, so now water runoff is starting to peak at this time. And in May, in my experience and what we've seen is like conditions can really vary dramatically based on like the type of snowpack that they had over the winter. Like, was it a heavy snow? Was there a lot of snow in the spring? Was it earlier in the winter? So May is really dependent on what type of winter it was.
And just for the audience, yeah. So this is the river gauge for the Merced River at Happy Isles, which is at the head of Yosemite Valley. And this is what Katie's saying. So like you're starting to see significant melting starting in May this spring. Like suddenly it picked up pretty dramatically. And it's the same thing last year. So it was a very different winter last year, but May and then really into June is when we saw peak runoff last year.
And so, yeah, so then that's May, getting into June. So that's really when like the rapid transformation is happening as the snow is melting. The melt, of course, is going to start at lower elevations. So some of those areas will start to be like dry trail and snow free. You're still going to be pretty like snowbound up in certain aspects in like north facing passes and higher elevation areas. Oh, yeah, perfect.
You can keep on talking and I'll tee this up.
Okay, perfect. And then, so June is also the time. So if there is snow, I think it's good to be aware that this is the time when like the snow, late spring and then early summer, like this is when the snow is really becoming compacted and supportive. So avalanche concerns are much lower. And then also it can like support weight. So a lot of times you can walk over it much more easily. Although, of course, in the late afternoons, it can still get quite post-holy. So timing that snow travel correctly is still going to matter. And having that skill set. June, daytime temperatures are getting comfortable, but night times are still pretty cold. And then lots of daylight is another quality of June. And then mosquitoes are not out usually yet. So do you want to talk about what you're showing on the screen right now?
Yeah, because I'm sure everyone's looking at it going, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
So in Caltopo, one of the neat layers, and it relates to this question earlier about what should I expect for my trip in June? So if you're concerned about lingering snow, the best thing to do is that you look at some of the historic snow plots. So this is California, and this blue line, this is 2023, 2024. So you can see that it peaked right around the 1st of April, or maybe, yeah, peaked right around the 1st of April, and the descent started to melt. And if you find an equivalent year, so for example, maybe this snowpack was similar to the year of like 2018, 2019, and I would have to go back to the data to actually take a look. And then you can pull up CalTopo and you can look through the historic Sentinel weekly imagery. So this is it's like a weekly satellite photo, and it will give you an idea about where the snow still is. And we use this like we rely on this really heavily when we're planning our spring trips. So like last year was like epic, and I'm not one to like speak in hyperbolic terms, but last year at the end of May, this is what the High Sierra still looked like. It was something like 260% of average or 240% of average snowpack. So we were looking at this imagery every week. We were like I was like refreshing the screen, waiting for the new imagery to come in. And from week to week, you could just kind of start to see it melting away. And one of the things that I was doing often is that like the last time we saw a huge snowpack like this was the year it was like it would have been 2019. Let's see, hold on. Well, I know like 2016 into 17 was huge. I think the other one was 18 into 19. But again, you can just like flip through, and you can go back years at this point. So like again, I was referencing was that big snowpack. I think it was 2017. So I was looking back and saying how does the snowpack right now relate to like 2017? Yeah, it was 2017 because this is the middle of July. So anyway, a great tool for you to use, and this will answer your questions about June. Like, hey, what are the conditions going to be like? It just varies so much. So look at it's worth the subscription to CalTopo for access to the Sentinel satellite imagery.
Yep, absolutely. So let's get into July. So what should backpackers expect in July?
July is typically the first full month of summer, so it's very green, lots of wildflowers, there's lots of water. The river levels are manageable. There's still probably snow in areas, but it's very predictable about where it will be, and it won't be that much, typically. The big news for the backpackers is that in July, the mosquitoes come out. And the mosquitoes in the Sierra, they're not at like Alaska levels, but they're like next level down. So it's like the B team is in Alaska, is in California. So it can still be really intense. And if you are not prepared for the mosquitoes in the Sierra and you're there during peak hatch, like you're going to be really uncomfortable. I will tell you that from personal experience. I remember a trip with in 2008 with Buzz Burrell and me. We were doing the Sierra High Route for the first time, and I was out there in my Go Light Marathon running shorts with a 2.5-inch split inseam and short sleeve or a long sleeve knit shirt, and the mosquitoes just ate me alive. I did a lot of that hike in my rain jacket because it was just like that. It was like the only relief I could get.
Yeah. Just like walk faster and put your rain clothes on.
It was very uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's towards the end of July, usually the bugs fade, and then that brings us into August. Katie, what would you like to say about August?
Yeah, so this is what many consider to be like the absolute best month. The snow is pretty much gone unless it's been a really, really high snow year previously, like Andrew was talking about. The high water is down, fewer bugs at this point, predictable weather, it's like stabilized, usually, especially towards the end of August, like any monsoonal patterns are starting to die off as well. And things are starting to sort of, especially towards like late August, early September, the wildflowers are starting to wane, things are drying out a little bit. And then that just progresses as we get into September. And in September
starts like summer. It's like basically a continuation of August. And then at some point, it transitions into fall. And by the end, certainly by the end of September, it will feel like fall. And I've been out there a number of Septembers, and there's usually like a day or two where you can feel the shift. And it's just like, oh, it's now fall. It's actually a pretty cool sensation. The crowds drop off dramatically after Labor Day, so you don't have to worry about quite as much of the permit competition. And some of the high use areas you can get into without feeling like you might feel like the place has been abandoned sometimes. Like there's all this infrastructure and you can see all the impact of people and you're like, where is everyone? You have no bugs, and the daytime temperatures are really comfortable. The nighttime temperatures are either cool, but they can also get cold. It's usually the first month where you start to see sub-freezing temperatures even at night. maybe not consistently, but definitely by like the third week of September, you're going to start to see like temperatures around freezing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Before we jump into logistics, there's a question. Charlie asked, what previous year are you using as comparison for trips this year? Which I think is a great question. And we were going to talk about 2024 expected conditions later. Do you want to wait on that to show like average snowpack for this year and how it would compare?
I can, yeah, let me jump in because I was actually able to find. So this is these are the interactive charts that are put together by the California Data Exchange Center, which is like it's the California Department of Water Resources. And I'm actually going to put this in the chat so everyone has access to it. And in most other states in the West, this water service is provided by, it's basically like a function of NOAA. I think it's actually the Department of Ag. It's all the SNOTEL sites. But California, it's a big state. Water is really important to them, so they have their own resources. And what you can start to do is you can use these charts, and you can just start looking for years that look similar. So like by default, they have the max and the min, which is 82, 83, and 14, 15. Those are your max and mins. So I'm going to turn those off, and I'm just going to start trying to find maybe a year where it looked kind of similar. So here's my blue lines. Like, nothing really, like, there's nothing really good yet. Like that's like really tracks nicely. It's certainly not going to be the minimum. So like this yellow line or this green line, like you may be getting closer. So you could start looking up those years. That would be like 2000. Let's see, like blue and greens. You could start looking up those years and just start playing around with the data. And so far, I haven't seen anything where it really closely tracks. So I'd have to spend some more time. And I'm not going to do it right
now. Good choice. Okay.
Rabbit hole. Bad rabbit hole.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk about, so that's seasonality. Let's talk about logistics a little bit. And we're only going to spend a little bit of time here because you touched on it earlier as you were doing the orientation. But essentially, like, how are you getting to the trailheads? And there are fortunately a lot of options. And it's really like your plans are going to be highly dependent on whether you're starting on the east side or you're going to be on the west side. So like Yosemite, Inyo, or whether you're going to be in like Sequoia-Kings, for example. But as Andrew mentioned, there's tons of airports, tons of great towns to base yourself out of, whether it's Mammoth Lakes or Fresno or flying into Reno or many other options. And I would say there's some mass transit options. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sounds like Harley Davidson just like drove through your car.
I have I'm right on downtown Slide. My window's open. I apologize, everyone. The best place I would say to go is we've done a ton of work for our California trips organizing this information. So Andrew, are you dropping
it?
Yeah,
I'll drop it.
We have a logistics page that we give to our clients to help them plan all of their trips. And we have like airports in there, mass public transport options. We also have like good restaurants in some of these towns. So if you're just like looking for information, we've done a lot of work to figure this out already. So I would say the best place to go is there. So it's in the chat. And then if anyone's watching the replay, I will post this link in the blog post where we're going to put the replay as well. So that's sort of like transportation logistics. And then I know permits are a big concern for people.
Yeah, I think it might be, Katie, I think it might, one thing that I didn't talk about earlier when we were talking about these, like kind of trying to give people an orientation, let's just kind of talk about like the areas in general.
Yes.
So we before had said that like your north boundary of the High Sierra is 108, which runs from Sonora over to Bridgeport. And then you're on the south end, it's going to be, boy, I'm sort of struggling without some maps here. So it's going to be like the Kern. So maybe something like that. And then within these areas, so up top, starting at the north, you have Immigrant Wilderness, which is managed by Stanislaus National Forest. And then you have Hoover Wilderness, which is managed by Humboldt-Toiyabe. And then just to the south of that, you have Yosemite National Park. And Yosemite, this is way better. So here's Yosemite's in pink. And Yosemite itself can be kind of thought of in two different ways. There's two main watersheds in Yosemite. There's the Tuolumne River, kind of here, and then there is the Merced River here. Interesting thing for those of you. I'm gonna tangent for a second. So Yosemite Valley, the Merced River flows through Yosemite Valley, but Yosemite Valley was actually not carved by a glacier in the headwaters of, well, partly the most carving was actually done by a glacier that poured over from the Tuolumne River watershed. Because if you look at the map nowadays, you can realize this. But basically, the Merced River, this is a hanging valley. So this is like Little Yosemite Valley. This is a hanging valley off of the main Yosemite Valley. And the main Yosemite Valley, it goes up Tioga, or not Tioga Creek. This is Tenaya Creek. So it goes up Tenaya Creek, and what happened is that this huge glacier, which the remnants of which are now on Mount Lyell, so it's called the Tioga Glacier, and it was at one point like 60 miles long, and it carved the Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne, which is this area, and some lobe of that glacier poured over the watershed here basically near Tioga Road, and it poured down into Yosemite Valley to carve out Yosemite Valley. How's that, Katie?
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Watch a geologist correct me. Okay, so back to like the big areas here. So after Yosemite, to the south of Yosemite, you have it's sort of a combined area. It's the Ansel Adams and John Muir Wilderness. So this is managed mostly by Sierra National Forest, and then on the east side, this is all Inyo National Forest. So Inyo National Forest sort of manages this like corridor of land that is on the east side of the Sierra Crest. So it manages some of the land next to Yosemite, and it manages the land next to Ansel Adams and John Muir. Further south, you have Kings Canyon or Sequoia-Kings Canyon National Park. Historically, these were two separate parks. This is Sequoia National Park, and this was, I believe this was founded first because of the giant trees there. And then Kings Canyon National Park is this area here. And sometime in the 80s, I believe these were started to be managed together. So it became Sequoia-Kings Canyon National Park. South of Sequoia-Kings Canyon National Park, you have a little bit more of Inyo, and then Sequoia National Forest starts, and this would be like your Golden Trout Wilderness area. So those are your areas, and as Katie was saying, like if you draw a line along the Sierra Crest, something like that, if your trip starts on the east side, you want to start from LA or from Reno, and if your trip starts on the west side, then you want to go in on a Fresno, the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Let's talk about permits. I saw there's a bear bag question. We're going to get to that actually in just a minute, and regulations. And then bridge outages also, I will put a resource in the chat. So yeah, permits. Do you want to talk about mostly like wilderness permits for this? I mean, we don't need to get into commercial permits, obviously.
Yeah, let's just talk about wilderness permits.
Yeah.
Actually, why don't you talk about it? Because I'm going to pull up a few things that I think would be helpful. Helpful for some of the conversations going forward.
Okay, yeah. So I think almost I'll say most trailheads have what's like a trailhead quota model essentially, and many people know this already, but you can reserve these permits online at rec.gov, usually 6 months in advance. Some places still have like walk-up permits, but those also now can be reserved on rec.gov, usually about 1 week out. Emigrant National Forest has walk-up permits still. And then actually we were looking at this earlier today, Sequoia National Forest, you can still do it like manually by filling out a form online. So that's essentially the permit system. It's best to just like look into the specific place that you want to go, but most people are going to be going to rec.gov. So check the specific area for like the timeline. And if it's a really popular place, like get on like right at the moment the permit is available.
Yeah. One thing about Sierra permits, so we pointed out earlier when we were kind of giving you the tour, like the High Sierra is managed by multiple agencies. So, but one of the nice things is that for the most part, if you start in an area, they allow you to cross jurisdictions without needing a new permit. There are some restrictions on that. So for example, if you pull a permit for immigrant wilderness, you can't hike south of Tioga Road. And if you want to do Mount Whitney, you might need a special permit for that. And if you want to go, south over Donahue Pass out of Yosemite, you need a permit for that. So there are some restrictions, but in general, you get one permit and you just go.
Some corrections in the chat here. Michael said walk-up permits are issued 2 weeks out. So all these California locals are.
Yeah, that's actually a little nuance. So it depends a little bit on what area you are, but the walk-up permits, yeah, they're no longer like true walk-up permits. You can start to reserve them online, like something like 2 weeks out. And then any permits that are still left would be available for walk-up. And you can definitely get walk-up permits, but it's not like the way it used to be where you could like stand in line starting at like 5 a.m. and then they would issue, like they would give you, starting at 11 a.m., they would issue permits for the following day. So like if you wanted a really coveted permit, like a Whitney permit or a John Muir Trail permit or something like that, which that permit doesn't really exist, so it'd be like a Donahue, like a Wild Canyon permit, you could do that, but you can't really do that anymore. I don't miss that.
Yeah. So yeah, the takeaway is like check on the specific place and agency that manages it. So, because a lot of them are very nuanced. So let's talk about regulations, like food storage, campfires, and like dealing with waste, essentially, some kind of L&T type topics. So you have a really big question people are having, and we've seen some of this in chat, is like food storage regulations. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah. Although I'm getting so many questions about river crossings on the San Joaquin Bridge that maybe we should just give them what they want and let's get there. Do you want to go there? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I think we should go there.
Yeah. Let's do that.
So let's talk about the San Joaquin Bridge first, and I think I will. I think I'm going to do a little bit of driving. So the San Joaquin Bridge, it's a critical bridge for JMT and PCT hikers because it crosses the San Joaquin, I think it's the South Fork of the San Joaquin, and really low at like 7,000 feet. And during peak melt, here it is here. It's this bridge right here. And I will put this link in the chat for everyone because there's a bunch of good data and information in this blog post. So this bridge got washed out last summer, and it was basically like damaged by either, I can't remember if it was like a snow, like an avalanche or a wet slide or a big tree or something, but it got damaged. They've had to, I think last year they finally ended up just like pulling out the pillars and let it collapsing into the river or something. And this could, in a high year like last year, this is a potentially fatal crossing. So there are a couple of options for getting around it last year, and I'm not going to go into them because they're described really well on that post that I just put up. But here's what I know about the bridge, and this is only based on some comments that people have left. So someone says, from what I've learned on the PCT Reddit and the PCTA Facebook groups, it sounds like they will rebuild the bridge sometime this summer, depending on the snowpack. They hope to be finished by 2025. And then someone else said, let's see, update as of March 29th. I called Inyo National Forest today and was advised that JMT through hikers will be allowed to use the Paiute Bishop Trails alternate, which is described in that blog post. The ranger also indicated that it might be possible to use the new bridge by late summer, even if it's not 100% completed. So that's not going to help. Someone said they're doing, let's say, the bridge outage. This is Anna. She's 5'3". She wants to do it in early to mid-August. Anna, I think that probably you probably should have a plan B. I probably wouldn't plan on that bridge being available, but there'll be a lot more information that comes in prior to that. So someone else I thought said like June 1st, and like it might as well be functionally, it might as well be like the 2022, or it might as well be summer of 2023 conditions. Oh, Teddy offers a good little, he says they disassemble the bridge and put the pieces on the bank. And he forwarded it in early October 2023, which makes total sense because by that time, most of the snow would have been gone and those cooler nights would have meant not much snow was melting anyway. Okay, so is everyone done with the San Joaquin Bridge yet? But we might as well also talk about river crossings, Katie, since we're at it. Okay, so this slide here, this is the river gauge for Happy Isles, which is at the head of Yosemite Valley, and it doesn't, like, the John Muir Trail and Pacific Crest Trail, it doesn't cross this area, but all of the crossings that are on those trails, they feed into the Merced River, or at least a handful of them. So this just gives you an idea about what the snow has been doing and how it's been melting. So I'm going to guess that probably this is the peak this year. So it ended up peaking at 5.9 feet ish, maybe it was over 6.7 feet. In comparison, the peak last year was at 8.3 feet, which doesn't sound like a huge difference, but when you think about that percentage-wise, it's actually pretty dramatic. I'll also point out that last year, you notice how long it took for the snow to melt off. I mean, you're talking about like high water levels. The peak this year was still happening over like Independence Day weekend last year. So I would expect probably pretty normal crossings this year, but if you're out there in June, you should be prepared for high water. And if you're looking for a resource for high water, I'm going to put this blog post in there too. This is a resource that I put together years ago, and it's basically includes this map and a spreadsheet of all the crossings with descriptions and alternates. So, for example, like I've shown a couple of Katie, I have someone scratching at my door.
Oh.
Can you pick up from here and talk?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay, we'll come back to 2024 conditions. Let's jump back to where we were with food storage regulations. We'll cover this quickly, and then we're going to talk about gear selection, route planning, and then skills and conditions, all in like 10 minutes. Okay, so food storage regulations. Check the specific place you're going, but generally speaking, so like hard-sided canisters are going to be required in Yosemite and Sequoia-Kings. Sequoia-Kings also has food lockers in many of the high-use areas that you can use. Ursacs are allowed in the national forests, so Emigrant and Inyo. And then kind of when we were talking about this earlier, we were thinking though, like sort of know your audience, and what we mean by that is if you're going to be in a high use area, regardless of where it is, using a hard side canister might be a good idea. The other regulation that we want to talk about is just being aware of campfire regulations. So know, again, the campfire regulations of where you're going, but our recommendation would be just don't have them. That's what we do on our guided trips. We just don't have them anywhere in the West. And that would be our recommendation as well. And then the last item that we wanted to speak towards regarding regulations and LNT is please pack out your toilet paper. It's not going to degrade in this type of environment. So pack it out or learn the backcountry of the day and use that instead. All right, you're back. You have a cat in the window?
No, not yet. He'll find his way, I'm sure.
All right. So let's go over gear selection quickly. It's going to vary by the season. And the biggest recommendation we could get for this is just like doing conditions assessment. So on Andrew's website, we have many examples of what to include in a conditions assessment, but it's really going to, again, just like depend on what time, in that 4-month window that you're going. And you can look up like the NCEI website and find average precipitation, average temperatures. You can look at the satellite imagery. You can look at some of the resources, the water resources Andrew has been going through. So those are all listed in that blog post that he just put in there. And that's the best way to determine which gear to pack. But essentially you want to use that conditions assessment to determine your gear choices. And the big ones to think about with the Sierra are sun protection. That's going to be consistent pretty much no matter the season that you're going in. So especially for the upper body, so maybe like sun hoodie, hat, and then face. So sunglasses, something that is like covers your neck as well, sunscreen, maybe sun gloves. Bug protection if you're going in like that July month. or if it's like a strange bug season. So that might be like a bug hoodie, or making sure that your shelter has bug netting inside of it. Most likely minimal rain gear, maybe like a lighter rain jacket, but you probably don't need like a heavy duty rain jacket, and probably not rain pants. But unless, of course, the short-term forecast, if you check that and it's some sort of like monsoonal pattern, then like take your rain gear, of course.
We've been mentioning this monsoonal pattern. Maybe we should just do a quick explanation of that.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, in much of the Southwest, Colorado, and the West, there's like a monsoonal pattern that often happens in like July through August, where there will be a buildup all day and then afternoon thunderstorms. Usually the storms don't last like all day. It's usually like a few hours that they last in the afternoon, but they can be really intense, with a lot of lightning and a lot of thunder that comes along, and sometimes hail that comes along with it as well. So if you are at a high elevation and you're hit by one of these, like maybe you don't see it building, or maybe you haven't checked the forecast. I don't know how you wouldn't see it building if you, but anyways.
Unless if you're not looking up.
Totally.
Look up.
It would be hard to miss. But anyways, if you were caught at high elevation, so here, sometimes they come in super fast, and maybe you think that it's like not coming that fast, but if you get hit with it when you're up high, it can get really cold. And of course, there's lightning danger as well. So being aware that that is a weather pattern in this area, and how to avoid it, like plan your day around it, is a good idea. So that's really, yeah.
I would just add, like, the key thing with the monsoons, it just gets cold. I mean, when it rains in the Sierra, it's really cold. So this is not like East Coast style rain where it rains and you can just be like out in it in your t-shirt. Like, it's not like that. The temperature is going to drop 15 or 20 degrees, and you're wishing that you had a mid layer, and you're wishing you brought heavier rain gear. So just, I don't want to scare anyone, but like, just be prepared that it's typically like bluebird and beautiful and wonderful, but then if you get in an active monsoon pattern, it can be pretty uncomfortable.
Yep. Okay, let's jump to route planning and mapping. So do you want to take this one?
Yeah, there are actually a couple of questions that came in on the chat. So Nathan, one of our multi-time alumni, asks, could you give some insight on your thought process on whether to take traction during transitional pieces? For example, if you're doing the Yosemite high route in late June. I've always struggled with this one, like giving people like accurate advice, because it depends so much on the conditions, on your route, and most importantly, like on your skill set. Because there are things that a seasoned snow traveler will do wearing a pair of La Sportiva trail running shoes that someone else is going to want like a 10-point crampon and like leather boots on. So it's the same thing with the ice axe. It's like, well, do I bring the ice axe? So we dealt with this last year when we were planning the trips. I think that a lot of our clients last year appreciated having like some traction if they were going to be, when they were walking on extensive snow. It just gave them like that extra purchase, that extra comfort. But I think a lot of the guides said like, well, I would rather would have had 10 ounces of salami and cheese.
Yeah, I think the way I would approach that is like doing some of the things we talked about, like checking the Sentinel satellite imagery to know the snow, like the extent of the coverage, knowing your route, so knowing where like it might hold snow, and like what are for me when I'm making that decision, it's like what is the extent of the snow and the steepness of where it's going to be. So if it's like slopes that aren't going to be that steep, I'm not as worried about it. Having like an ice axe, for example, versus if I'm going to be traveling up a really like over a steep pass or up a steep gully or something like that. And then, yeah, I totally agree of like knowing your comfort with snow travel. Yeah, similarly, I think there are people who would say like better to have it and not use it than to need it and not have it.
Yeah, it can be really scary to be on terrain where you feel under-equipped. It can be really scary. You're like, that was such a dumb thing. Why did I not carry those extra 10 ounces either of an ice axe or some traction? The other question that kind of comes to mind when we talk about gear selection and the mosquitoes, that's the other like hard thing to predict. So my best advice about mosquitoes is just trying to get some very recent trip reports from people. And if in doubt, go in there with the assumption that you are going to see bugs, possibly really intense bugs. So, and when I say be prepared, I'm talking about head net, permethrin treated, long sleeve shirt, ideally a hoodie, like a long sleeve hoodie. Definitely trekking pants so that you're not hiking in shorts. So permethrin treated clothing, and then sealable shelter at night, so something that has like an inner or a bivy or something like that.
Flexors in the
Boy,
window.
it's my boy.
There is a question, any recommendations for traction that's better than microspikes that still works with trail runners? There are things called strap crampons. Petzl makes some and Black Diamond also makes some. They do work with trail runners, but they're meant to work with like any shoe size, unlike other types of crampons that are like they need the like shoe the welt, the boot welt in them. These like strap crampons. I think I used the Black Diamond strap crampons last year. They do pretty well with trail runners, and obviously have a lot more deeper teeth.
Okay, let's move on to some route planning.
Yep.
Which is related to mapping. So Katie and I were talking about this earlier. We're saying like, well, what are the recommendations on like how to plan trips in the Sierra and kind of what maps do you need? So I think that it'll be easiest if you put your itinerary in one of 4 buckets, and that will drive some of the other things. So one bucket is that you're following an established trail. So one of the longer trails like the John Muir Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, the High Sierra Trail, those would be like the big ones. And then for those trails, your best option is probably the Far Out app. It's all there. You're the blue dot following the red line. Is that right? Or is it the other way around? I think you're the blue dot following the red line, and it's a very well-established trail, and it will get you there. So that's kind of the easiest thing for the established trails. If you're following, like the Sierra gets thoroughly used, like, and thoroughly explored every year. So a lot of people have put up sort of less formal trip itineraries on platforms like AllTrails. So that would be another option where if you've never been to the Sierra before, just pull something off the shelf someone else has done, and that seems reasonable for your abilities and your comfort level. So AllTrails would be a good option for something like that. If you are planning on following any of the established high routes, so that would be the Yosemite High Route, the Kings Canyon High Basin routes, the Sierra High Route original, or the Southern Sierra High Route, there are guidebooks for all of those 4 routes. And those guidebooks should include a narrative description of where you should be going, and then also some kind of map set. And then that leaves like the 4th bucket of like itineraries. This would be some kind of DIY itinerary. So where maybe you're taking a little bit of AllTrails route, you're pulling a little bit of the Pacific Crest Trail, you're pulling a little bit in from the Yosemite High Route, and you're making those your own to make it fit either your interests or your timeline. And then if you're going to be doing that, then CalTopo is going to be your best friend. CalTopo has by far the strongest website platform for trip planning. And then there's a map or an app for your smartphone that will sync up. But I don't want to go into too much detail about like our navigation system, but for any off-trail routes, especially, you should be using have a printed set of maps, ideally the USGS quadrangles, 7.5-minute quadrangles, and then a recreational map, like a Trails Illustrated map that kind of has like everything on it, and then your backup is your phone.
Okay, and then a couple additional resources that we wanted to mention would be having, especially if you're, well, I would say for any of the Sierra stuff, there's a book by Secor called The High Sierra Peaks, Passes, and Trails. That's excellent. It will like have every pass on there and a description of it. So reading about that, especially if you're going to be off trail. The High Sierra Topics Forum is another good place to find a lot of good information if that's unfamiliar to you. And I think that's it before we move on to skills. I will just say it's the Sierra, I mean, as far as making your own itinerary, it's a great place to do off-trail travel. There's like lots of great travel surfaces and the features are really prominent. So it makes for easy navigation or relatively easy navigation as well.
Yeah, the thin air and the vertical will kick your ass, but it's really blissful cross-country travel. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about skill sets, specifically for the Sierra. So like gear, it's going to depend on the season that you go in. So breaking this down just by like what part of the season you go in. So if you're there in June, what are some of the skill sets that people might want to have for June?
So if you're there in June, the backpacking, like, it can actually feel a lot more like mountaineering than backpacking. And it depends a little bit on the June, but like last year, June was like full on mountaineering. So you're talking about route finding and you're talking about snow travel skills. And then the other thing that happens, all that snow is melting. So you also need to be prepared to cross creeks, and you need to have some creek crossing skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it's because it's not also just like there's like the crossing skill of like actually doing it, but a lot of the skill is just knowing where and when to ford the creek.
Yeah.
Hint, it's usually not at the summertime crossings.
Yeah.
So,
we did an Ask Me Anything about this, like all about that early season High Sierra stuff in like May of last year. Maybe it's later than, no, I think it's about May of last year, where we did a recording and then we linked several blog posts. So if you want to really like go deep on this topic, I would visit some of those resources we talk about.
I'm putting that link in the chat right now. I'd forgotten we did that. Yeah, so that's a great resource. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. So that brings us to July. So skill sets for July, one of those would be like mosquito mitigation. So, bringing multiple head nets and having like some netting within your shelter. And I think just like practicing being zen and calm. Yeah, exactly. That's a skill set. Exactly. Just tune it out. And like the ability to like lift your head net up, shovel food into your mouth, and then put your head net down real quick again. And then also lightning and weather awareness, as we were mentioning, that monsoonal pattern can start in July. And then something that we didn't mention anytime, like kind of an overall Sierra skill set, would be just understanding altitude illness and the progression from like AMS and how that can progress into HACE, and then also what HAPE is. So that's high altitude cerebral edema or pulmonary edema, just the symptoms of those and how to resolve those. Those are not going to be common, like especially HACE and HAPE in the Sierra, because not, you're not at like 15,000 plus feet of elevation, but they do happen. And at least knowing symptoms and how to resolve them is a good idea. And then August is pretty dreamy. Oh, I can't hear you. Is that just my problem? Someone put in the chat if you can hear Andrew, because I can't, but maybe that's just me. Yeah, someone says can't hear. We can't hear him either. Okay. All right. Copy. I think he's fixing it. So there's a question in the chat. I'll take this and then while Andrew's fixing his microphone. So when do you think the mosquitoes hatch? Will it be this season in the high country? I can't hear the beans. Boy, yeah. So mosquito hatch, we were talking about this earlier, probably like mid-July, early to mid-July. Do you want to say something so we can see if we can hear you? Oh, still can't hear. No. Early to mid. Oh, now we can.
Yeah, something must have pressed the mute button.
Okay. Somebody did that, Luxor. How dare he?
He might have actually stepped on the keypad. He might have stepped on the keyboard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I blame the cat. Someone already said that in the chat. All right. So we were talking about mosquito hatch, probably early to mid-July, and then tapering off by the end of July, and probably pretty nice by then into early August. Okay.
And then that brings us, or I guess September. Like September is going to be probably like that. I'm not sure if you can talk about this, but like just managing probably colder weather. That's your September skill set. Okay, so let's talk about expected conditions for 2024, and then I think we'll probably close out. Maybe there'll be a few more questions that come in from the chat. So we've already given you this. I've given you a link to the snowpack charts. So go ahead and take a look at those. Figure out where 2024 or how 2024 relates to past years, and then start doing look at the Sentinel satellite imagery, look at some of the historic runoff, and you can at least start to develop a sense for what this year is going to look like. Based on what we can tell from the snowpack charts, it looks like the amount of snow was like slightly above average, and then it looks like it's been a pretty aggressive spring melt. So I would expect pretty normal conditions. So that's going to be like peak runoff right around now. It's going to transition significantly in June, and by July, the bugs, sometime in July, the bugs are going to come out, and July is going to feel like the first month of summer. August should be wonderful, a wonderful August, and then in September, it'll start transitioning to fall. Okay, so we've looked at the satellite imagery, or the Sentinel satellite imagery. We've looked at the river levels. Kind of going through my checklist if you can't tell. I've shared with you some resources about how to research conditions or likely conditions, and we talked a little bit about bugs for this year.
Yeah, I think we've covered conditions.
Okay.
Do we want to? So let's see. There's a few questions in the chat. Storms, lower elevation and hang tight, tent and wait, keep on walking. Suggestions.
Where is that?
That's Elise in the chat.
So she's run it all through past
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, so like encountering storms. So I'm guessing she says stay at a lower elevation and hang tight. Tent, like sit in your tent and wait, or keep on walking. Suggestions.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. That's actually a great question because so if you get hit by a monsoon storm, so like it's going to be predictable. Like you're going to see it. It's going to be developing. It's going to start with like puffy, nice looking clouds at like 10 or 11 a.m. and then it's going to just keep building, and suddenly it's going to look sort of very ominous and like, hey, like something bad is going to happen soon. You might even notice too, like the clouds dropping and like starting to like cover the tops of the mountains. I probably wouldn't set up shelter like before it started raining, but I would be prepared if I feel a little under-equipped. Like there's nothing wrong with sitting out a big rainstorm in your shelter. It's actually quite wonderful. You can nap, and then typically like it blows through, and you can hike another hour or two before dinner.
Yeah, I would say, especially if you start to hear thunder, that start to like be. Have some rules for yourself. So like start to be looking at like if the thunder and the lightning is like 30 seconds apart, start looking where your bailout options are. First of all, before that, even like try not to place yourself on an exposed ridge line during a storm. Like if that's coming in and you know you have to like go up an elevation and walk a ridge line for a while, just like hang low, wait it out, like you said. But if you're up there and it comes in, have some rules for yourself. Look around for bailout points where you can get to lower elevation, and then read up on some lightning safety. So. Okay.
I think we should call it a night.
We should probably wrap it up. Yeah.
Okay. Listen, everyone, we really enjoy you joining us tonight. Hopefully you've gotten a lot out of this presentation. Katie, how many spots do we have left for the High Sierra?
4 spots. Yes. Check out Andrew's website to see what we have available, and you can submit an application there. And we don't know when we're going to do this again because we're leaving Alaska for 2 weeks. And then we have like 10 days, and then we'll be in the High Sierra. So we'll see.
And then in August we sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.